Baldur's Gate 3 absolutely cleaned up at the Game Awards this year, and with many other award ceremonies as well. And the discussion surrounding this has reminded a lot of people just how toxic and poisonous console wars discussions can really end up being. And to me, this ties directly into the topic of today's video, discussion on game discussion. People become attached to the things they like. That's only natural, that's human behavior. But for a lot of people out there, it kind of feels like gaming discourse boils down to critiques being a personal attack on you for enjoying something, or praise for another game is an indirect indictment on them for liking something else. Now, I imagine most of you out there realize that is completely stupid, but it is a feeling that contextualizes a lot of the sentiment and reaction to Baldur's Gate 3 winning Game of the Year, over games like mainly Spider-Man 2 from what I've seen personally, but I imagine it exists on some levels for the other games. I've talked about before how gaming discourse surrounding Game of the Year often boils down to sports team-esque debates, and people treating their game of choice as if it's a sports team, while putting down the competition. I've always found that a little bit cringe to some degree or fashion, because you end up rooting for corporations, and in this industry, like the vast amount of us are consumers. We are consuming a product, and it is in our best interest for there to be great competition surrounding that, and for there to be a lot, and even a plethora, of amazing games releases, which I think we have had in the year 2023. I always like to take the end of the year as a little bit of a celebration of the industry as a whole, at least when it's warranted, and I think this is a year where it is warranted in terms of how many amazing games we have had. Two of my top 3 games of the year weren't even nominated for Game of the Year. They were Armored Core 6 and Final Fantasy 16. Absolute masterpieces of games in my opinion, that deserve recognition. And my personal Game of the Year is Baldur's Gate 3. But just because someone else may not like one of those 3 games or has some kind of critique about those 3 games, whether or not it's weapon balancing in Armored Core 6, or Final Fantasy 16 being real-time action, or Baldur's Gate 3 being turn-based. Those are just personal preferences and critiques that exist for some people. And while they may not, well, besides the Armored Core weapon balancing thing, necessarily describe how I feel about the game, I like to think that I'm at least mature enough to realize it's not a critique about me personally, and that I can still enjoy these games despite the fact that some people may not. No game is going to be created or designed to appeal to everyone, and more often than not in my experience and opinion, when games try to appeal to everyone, they end up pleasing no one or very few people compared to what they're aiming for. I think also on some level this, in terms of console wars, does stem from an overarching discussion on gatekeeping, and I think on some level it stems from a community facing backlash because someone who clearly doesn't know what they are doing comes in, spews some crap that is just plain wrong, and then people parrot it. Like, for instance, people coming into Baldur's Gate 3 are talking about Baldur's Gate 3 and calling it a point-and-click adventure. Sure, you point-and-click in the game, but it's a PC game, duh. But it's also wildly dismissive of pretty much every other aspect of Baldur's Gate 3 and what goes into that game and why people enjoy it. Not everyone comes into an argument to have a well-faith and well-mannered discussion. Some people troll or just like to be assholes. That is the way of the internet. A tale as old as time, and a tale that will be everlasting. And I've said this before, I think critique and criticism on the whole is extremely valuable in the video games industry. I want there to be more competition, because when there hasn't been, we have seen companies not even just say they're going to take a yard, they just take the mile. And I have a PlayStation 5, but it doesn't mean that I want Xbox to fail or whatever. I want Xbox to succeed and start pumping out great games. There needs to be more competition. And engaging in rudimentary discussions about console wars or going rah 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 my sports team in regards to a specific game release, yeah, it can be fun in the short term, I admit. Watch my reaction to the Game Awards. It's clear that I had a bias for Baldur's Gate 3 and wanted that game to succeed. Because I thought that game, and I still feel this way, defied a lot of trends of many mainstream games. And Baldur's Gate 3 on the whole showed that you can have a well-constructed, massive game with all this content and player choice and player agency without exploiting the player's wallet, or shoehorning in a bunch of predatory microtransactions in in-game stores and all that. I think gaming discussion on the whole on the internet, at least in the modern day, and you can argue this goes way back as well, is particularly poisoned with the topic of critique, because a lot of people view critique as a personal attack or indictment on them for enjoying something, when at the end of the day it is just an opinion or a statement of fact. For instance, the new Call of Duty game is largely composed of old locations and maps. You can like those maps, but that is an objective reality. And a lot of people out there will just not view that, on top of a lot of other rehashed mechanics and polarizing design choices, as worthy enough of a $70 purchase. To them, it's just not valuable enough. It's not enough bang for your buck there. I think you see this overarching topic about what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to this Game of the Year discussion, where there's a lot of people that had never heard of Baldur's Gate 3 or didn't really play Baldur's Gate 3. And when that game sweeped up a bunch of rewards, justifiably so in my opinion, they push back as if their game is somehow lesser because of that. I wouldn't call it lesser, I would just call it different. Games are a really cool medium, and we've been lucky that we've had so many amazing games come out in the year 2023, Spider-Man being one of them, Tears of the Kingdom being another one, Alan Wake 2 being another, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Baldur's Gate 3, Final Fantasy 16, Armored Core 6, Pikmin 4, Super Mario Wonder. We've had so many amazing games come out in the year 2023, and the funny thing is, they appeal to fundamentally different audiences. And while, again, I agree, I think Baldur's Gate 3 deserved all the awards that it got, maybe give Ben Starr from Final Fantasy XVI the best performance one. Outside of that, when I try and take a step back and look at the industry as a whole through an objective lens, I think it's clear it's Baldur's Gate 3. But most people aren't going to do that, and why should they? They've only played the games that they've played and that they're interested in. They form an attachment to their favorite game. That's just human nature. And they view critique or comparison as if saying another game is Game of the Year over it as an inherent indictment on them for liking that game. And I feel that this argument has poisoned video game discussion so intrinsically and so foundationally that it makes overarching critique about certain franchises and games especially hard to make. Especially when it comes to console exclusives, where not only do you have people that formed an attachment because of that game, you have people defending that game because it's under one company specifically. Tears of the Kingdom with Nintendo, Spider-Man 2 with Sony, Starfield with Xbox. And you can see this console wars discussion creep into the picture and creep into this argument that people feel the need to defend their purchase of a plastic box by defending a game and putting down others to prop that one game up, because it reinforces the idea to them that they made a smart purchasing decision when going for that console. Like they're rooting for the Boston Red Sox or the New York Yankees or whatever. This discussion fundamentally, in my opinion, does not help the consumer in any way. It doesn't bolster up pro-consumer policies and practices. All it does is give Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo an excuse to be as anti-consumer as they realistically can, because they know at the end of the day, they're going to have a core, die-hard fan base that will defend their decisions no matter what. I think Sony and PlayStation put out an amazing roster of games. I would like to see more diversity in terms of the offering of games that they put out, and a bit of a more frequent basis, but the games they put out are high quality. So many times, Sony enacts policy or puts out a new accessory that just leaves me baffled and befuzzled, if you will, if that's even a word, scratching my head saying, well, this is just worse than the competition has. And that's been kind of Sony's strategy that I've talked about before. Make sure they at least have some version of what the competition has. Lock people into the PlayStation ecosystem. Xbox and Nintendo try and do the same thing to different degrees of success. And I don't expect people to just go out and get every console, or just to get some really good gaming PC or whatever, even though you don't need a really good one, but you know my point. For a lot of people, it may only be viable to have one console or one main method or system in which to play a video game. I'm not gonna fault people for doing that, or for having that, or for being in that position. But I think when you let yourself get caught up in sports team ESPN-esque debates, that is when good and warranted video game discussion and criticism gets poisoned on the foundational level, and it shifts the discussion away from actual constructive feedback and pivots us over to a larger discussion about console wars. Look at the discussion surrounding Starfield, and how many people either hated or loved that game solely because it was an Xbox game. A lot of good, genuine discussion about the qualities of Starfield was had, and is still had in regards to a lot of these games. But the overarching discussion and discourse on the internet can be poisoned in one way or the other. A lot of people can just be rude, passive-aggressive, or just straight-up aggressive, mean-spirited, or just argue not in good faith. I try my best to just ignore those people, because they're not interested in having a well-faith or well-put-together discussion in the first place. But when you let that narrative, when you let people that engage in that dialogue dominate the narrative, then it distracts everyone else from the actual constructive feedback that could be given and could be discussed about. Me not thinking Spider-Man 2 is Game of the Year is not an indictment or a statement about people who think it is, or that people who had an absolutely incredible moment in time with Spider-Man 2. Those moments should be celebrated, because especially in a world that can be so dark and cruel like the one we live in, being able to find these moments that can bring you whatever happiness it can. I don't care if it's a video game or whatnot, that's something that's cool to me. I think Baldur's Gate 3 is a phenomenon. It is unfair, realistically speaking, to say that any other game nominated for Game of the Year is worse off because Baldur's Gate 3 exists. I want the industry at large to take a lot of lessons and hard looks at itself from Baldur's Gate 3. What that game proved was still capable in the modern video game industry, or at least still viable. But that doesn't mean Final Fantasy 16, Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man 2, Mario Wonder, whatever. It doesn't detract from all the good times people had with those games. Critique and criticism should not be interpreted as a personal attack because of what you like or what you play or what you have access to. It exists to inform other consumers to make a more informed purchasing decision, while also being able to inform developers and publishers of how some people may feel about a certain thing so that feedback could be taken into account in the future. 2023 was an absolutely incredible year for video games. That to me should be the focal point of online discussion. A celebration of all that has happened. There's been a lot of bad this year as well, but there's also been a lot of good. And that good and all that great discussion and all those memories, not memories, but all that good shouldn't be overshadowed by these discussions that don't benefit the consumer in any palpable way, at least that I can see. So here's what I want you to do. In the comments down below, let me know what your favorite game from this year was and what your favorite moment from that game was. Whether it was a story moment, a moment you had with your friends, or whatever. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and to hear your stories, because we should be celebrating video games right now, and that's what I want to do. So while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.